Welcome, Flyers Nitty Gritty fans, to the Always Level Up podcast, a podcast that focuses on using failure, perseverance, overcoming life's difficulties and using it as fuel. If anything, just a source of a growth mindset. I am very excited, actually, to introduce an old friend and a successful individual within the Philadelphia area. You'll probably hear more about him as he gets older. If you know anything about gaming or entrepreneurship in the area, you probably have heard his name. My old friend and CEO and founder of Nerd Street Games, John Fazio. Or Fazio. I don't even know how people say it nowadays.
Fazio, yeah,
Fazio.
No, I appreciate you having me. Good to see you. Been a long time, and we go way back.
Yeah, man, and appreciate you coming on. And for those who are listening, like they're probably used to me bringing on an athlete, right? I've had a few NHL athletes. I had Lisa Ann here, who's in sports radio, but obviously has her own crazy diverse lifestyle. But I thought you were perfect. I mean, going through your life, for those who are not aware, Fazio and I, we grew up together. I've known you since, I don't know, we're like, what, 11 12 years, yeah. Something like that, right? We've known each other quite a bit. I would say you were probably one of the people who've influenced me more than I realized as I got older. And it wasn't always the way that I thought, if that makes sense. And I think I see that today in your career and what you do. And the way you behave today. And I find that a lot of the things that you and I have talked about over the years, I've kind of picked that stuff up over time naturally. So I want to dig in. I want to give people a background on who you are, and I'll go through your journey. I'll explain, and I think people will understand why I brought you on here by the end. So let's talk about it this way first. Let's start off at the beginning. Grew up in a small town. You were always an athlete, right? Soccer player, always very good soccer player as well. I would argue that you and Josh Bienenfeld, and a little name shout out to him, maybe the two best players for your age group, right? And it was noticeable. And one thing that you always had is kind of that athletic mindset, that drive to compete. Why do you think you had that? Why were you like that at such a young age? And why do you think that soccer and teamwork, and Bienenfeld as well, who also is a successful person in his own right, why do you think you were kind of driven to be that competitive person?
It's funny you brought up Josh. He's probably one of the more influential people in my life, for the very simple fact that he was better than me. And, not only was he better than me, he was like a top 30 recruit in the country. Amazing. And, you take me and put me in any other school in our area and I was the best player. But I had one of the best players in the country in front of me. So I was never the best player, ever. I never got to experience that. I was always behind him. I always had to see him run faster, him score the best goal, so I was always humbled by that and kind of like put in my place in a way. And I think that, helped me. So it's funny that you bring him up, because I give him credit for that very often. Where it came from, like, bottom line is we both, come from very privileged upbringings. Like there's nothing we didn't, we could have asked for that we didn't have. And, two great parents who supported me, and every time they saw a skill or a strength, they empowered me to go after it. And so, my father had me on a soccer field when I was 2 years old, like a lot of us. But when he saw that I enjoyed it, he pushed me to go further. He was somebody who, as soon as I came home from school, and the first time I had used a computer in school, and I was really excited about it, again, a privilege that I went to a school that had computers when many schools didn't. I come home and my dad goes, "Here, let me get you a computer," and buys me a computer that I can take apart. Well, brought it home from his work, maybe stole it from his work, but, allowed me to take it apart, do this, whatever, and pushed me. And so, I think competitive drive to some extent is nature. It's going to be in you or not, and competition is survival in a lot of ways. It's built into our genetics. But I think, I had parents who really pushed and empowered that. And I, owe it all to my father, for cultivating that sense of competition and pushing me, because plenty of times I would have, given up, or wouldn't have found myself in a position to be recruited, or, get a chance to go play in Europe because he paid for a portion of it, things like that. So I'd say the competitive drive is something I had naturally, and really, the privilege that I had growing up is what amplified it.
Yeah, that's a great answer. And to give people a little background on Josh, I believe he did play D1 at Duke in the end, right? Yeah, and starting as a freshman.
Yep.
Yep. So he high level athlete, and you played D1 at Drexel, I believe,
Yep.
right, for a short period of time until eventually you kind of left college, right? So we'll dig into that a little bit.
Yeah.
And that is not a negative story; that's a success story. So people should be aware of that. But I do want to talk about your dad a little bit here, without going too deep. How did your dad deal with your ability? So, okay, let me start at this. You all always had a wide array of interests, right? Like you, like myself, you've always been, and I would say more because you're more athletic than I am, right? But you've always been this weird hybrid, right? You're like a nerd with an athlete, right? With a businessman, right? You're kind of an enigma. You don't, if people ask to, classify you, you're not necessarily like a one type of thing, right? And even the interview I listened to, right? How do you get your math league guys to hang out with your soccer team, right? How did your dad deal with your kind of wide variety of interests, or did he see no issue with it?
Yeah, I think in some ways it came from him, So he was an athlete, he was a football player, he was an Olympian water polo player. He was a really, kind of elite athlete, but at the same time, he loved technology. He was somebody, who as soon as when he was in high school, they had COBOL classes where you would print on the punch cards and take them out to get them through. As soon as he had access, he went to do it because he saw it as a future. He was like, this is the future. I'm going to have to take advantage of this technology if I want careers. And he was always ahead of that gap. He was always the guy who was putting together spreadsheets when people were still on paper. He was the guy digitizing every new office he came into. And so he had that really, like, he enjoyed tech. And I think that helped, a little bit. But then on the flip side, I give most of the credit to my mom because my mom was a nerd. Like my mom was math nerd, straight A student. But she also was a popular kid and had fun. And she was a track athlete. And I think I got a lot of that balance from her, where plenty of parents who see that you're really good at sports, but see you sitting at night playing video games on a PC might have said, like, you have to go this direction. But I think my mom, really kind of was like, that's what he loves doing. Let's push him in, what he loves doing. And so I always felt normal at home. I definitely had very different groups of friends. We had friends that wouldn't even talk to each other in school, that I would go home and play video games or drive to a LAN party at Sam Lee's house with a group of people that the kids I was playing soccer with were not hanging out with. And so that dichotomy I think was always supported by both of them. But I'll give my mom a lot of the credit there, for empowering the nerd side that I had, and not making me feel like that was a bad thing. But the other piece there I'd say was what my dad did, was he pushed me. He knew that I liked reading, and so he would push me to read biographies. And so when I was like 11, I read a book about Bill Gates, and I was just hooked. And it was like that minute on, I was like, yeah, I'm a nerd. Like, nerds run the world. That's what I want to be. And I really attached to that. So my dad gets the credit for that.
Oh, I love what you
My
said
mom's
there.
the reader though, so.
Yeah, well, I love what you said that the nerds run the world, because I think a lot of people don't really recognize that. Like there's kind of this media perception of what a nerd is, where a nerd has to be an unathletic person who's not popular, who's not good looking. And really, if you look at the world, I mean, the 1%ers are almost all nerds. Even if you look at athletes, they're nerds about what they do.
Yeah.
A lot of them, they're not out partying 24/7. Otherwise, they're not going to be in the 1%.
That was a big reason why we took the name, and it was all, it was cool because we were on North 3rd Street, so it looked like nerd, and that's where it was inspired. But the reason we decided when we were building a company to continue using that was really because we were like, let's take the derogatory out of it. Let's take this word back. It's our word. We're nerds. We're happy about it. We're proud. That's not a bad thing. And the fact that we're gamers now, we are in that same position that in the 80s and 90s, where the Revenge of the Nerds, that geeks rise to stardom. When you and I were in high school, it wasn't something to brag about, right, that you were really good at a video game. No girls would care about that. Nobody else cared. Yep. Nowadays, it's the popular kids are the best video gamers. Like, one of my favorite anecdotes, I was out surfing in Southern California, and these two kids, probably 14, 15 years old, and they were surfing circles around me, just like, I'm an average surfer at best, and these kids were just rolling me. And so we get out, and I'm walking up, and they're changing out of their wetsuits, and the kid puts an Overwatch hat on, the video game, the PC video game at the time. I don't even believe it might have been out on console, but I don't remember. And I looked at the kid, and I was like, oh, yo, and these were the jock, popular prom king kind of kid. And I was like, yo, you play Overwatch? And he looks at me and he goes, of course I play Overwatch. And it was like, get this guy away from me, but it was just like, it hit me that like it's a very different popularity. I think 21 Jump Street had the whole joke about it, right? Like the popular kids were the social activists, and then the jocks were the kids who were like the assholes. That was a wake-up call for me. And now it's different, and so nerds do run the world. Nerds are the center of culture. You got kids all around the world dyeing their hair purple because of Ninja, and you've got pro athletes changing the way they speak because of video gamers they're watching on Twitch.
That's a great point. And something I think about is that life is cumulative, right? Like we make this assumption about that everything we learn. But let me ask you this: what you learn from the nerd side of you and the athletic side of you, would you not say that it's all come kind of full circle, that you would say you maybe leveraged all of your experiences to kind of become who you are today?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think so this company is something that started as a passion project while I was running my software company. And when I decided that like, hey, this is something, like I want to go run this, I'm going to leave my software company. There was this moment where I was like, wow, this is literally every one of my passions and every one of my skill sets, from technology to an understanding of real estate to, an understanding of video games to sports and competition. It was just all of what I wanted to do, and it felt perfect. So yeah, it's the perfect combination, and it's been really, really exciting.
So did you feel like you were kind of going against the grain when you made that decision? I feel like for how long I've known you, and how long I'd say we'd be friends, I would never picture you as an easy person. Like I wouldn't say John Fazio is Mr. Easy, right? I wouldn't say you're agreeable in the sense, like, not that you're
most people wouldn't say I like to argue,
right.
So that's fair.
I'm not agreeable. I'm not agreeable at all. If we think about our youth, I mean, me and you probably argued and debated over stuff endlessly.
We'll call it debate because they always ended well.
Exactly. And that's the thing. I'm comfortable in that space, and so are you, right? So do you feel that attitude, that non-agreeableness, because again, when you go through something like a school system, which is something I think you'll understand, there is an agreeableness that has to go with that. You're sitting in a row, you're doing what people tell you to do, you're listening to what people tell you to listen to. And if you look at like the internet age today, I excelled considerably outside of school, right? Something you even mentioned to me, like once I started going to YouTube and just doing my own research and just digging deep, being my own thought leader in a lot of ways and finding my own stuff, that's where I really started to evolve beyond what school even was capable of giving me. How did it feel kind of being young? And I still want to stay kind of on the younger part of your life. How did it feel being younger and being that guy? Because from what I remember, our childhood, you were always that guy, and it comes with some issues. I mean, I don't mean like issues as in like creating problems with every person with you, but throughout life,
I got tossed out of school.
I have it. There you go.
Yeah. So it definitely caused issues. I think, somebody asked me once, like, what's the thing that made you the most you, whether it's negative or positive? And I said, I have to be different, and there's been a lot of negatives where like I could have done it the easy way, and I, paid a heavy price because had to be different, and there was some ego in the way. As I've gotten older, I like to think that the ego piece has really faded a lot, and I start to look at things from first principles. Why does it have to be different, or why does it have to be the way that it is now? But when I was a kid, my favorite thing in the world was when we got to geometry or algebra in 8th grade, and we did our proofs. And you'd have to like, here's how Pythagoras theorem was, proved, and you had to memorize it. My favorite thing in the world was solving it a different way. And, I don't know if you remember Miss Fricker, who was our math teacher. I used to go in and say, look, I did the proof differently. And she'd be like, well, you added a step here and this other one's simpler. And I'd be like, but I got it right. Like I came up with it. And that was like my favorite feeling, is doing it different. And I have that now still. There's all, when we have these meetings about corporate structure, we're 120 employees now. And there's a lot of precedent, right? I have COOs and CFOs and VPs that came from the MLB, the NBA, the NHL, and they have precedent. They say this is how it's done. And you know, one of my favorite things to say to them is like, I'm allergic to typical. If you tell me that it's typically done this way, I probably don't want to do it anymore. You know, or at least I have to spend a lot of time evaluating what else could be done. You know, this whole business was built outside that. You know, my software company Jarvis beforehand was built on that idea of like, everybody's saying software has to be done this way. Well, does it? Can't we do it differently? Can't we do it better? And so as a kid, you know, in young ages, it meant that, you know, I might ace my tests and do really good on standardized tests, but I would fail miserably because I refused to do homework and I refused to do projects. And it was probably third, fourth grade where I was just like, it hit me. And I remember being a very young kid looking at adults going, this authority is fake. You didn't, you know, this isn't something that's productive by implicity, like, or, you know, it's not an implicit productive, you know, thing to do. You're doing this for discipline. You're doing this to control me. You're doing this because there's a lot of us and you need us to stay in this path. And that drove me nuts. And any teacher I've had, any parent, any, you know, they'll all tell you the same thing, that I rejected that and I pushed back really hard against it, but not because I didn't want to learn, because I wanted to learn more than they were teaching me. And that was always the most frustrating part. Is I remember getting to a chemistry class in 7th grade, and I won't say the teacher's name, but she kind of said to me, you know, what's most interesting to you? It was like a topic on this chapter, and I said, well, here, I'm really interested in why this works this way. And she said, that's chapter 11. We don't get there till the end of the year. And I'm like, but I read the book this weekend. That's what I want to talk about. I'm learning. What do you mean? What else am I here for? And it was like, I'm here just to get ace this test so that you get approved. And it was so frustrating so early.
Check a box.
Yeah, to me, I do think that drove a lot of what I do. And I think, you know, in some ways, you know, I don't like the title, but I've been very contrarian in my life. And, you know, it's had a lot of negative impacts on personal relationships. You know, I'm sure it drives my wife nuts. But, you know, the reality is, I think too many people in our culture accept status quo, and they lose the concept of moving outside status quo because of absolutism and polarization. Everything's black, everything's white. You're either wrong, you're either right, and nobody wants to talk about the nuance in the middle. And so when it comes to changing things, people will say, you can't do it that way because it was never done that way, without talking about why, or, you know, why maybe it wasn't done that way in one context that's now a different context. So yeah, I think that's you got right to it. That's a critical part of my personality that had a lot of positives and a lot of negatives as a kid.
Yeah, but it's something you slowly work through, and it's interesting. I think about that now throughout time, because me and you were friends when we were younger, and I think about how I felt the exact same way, but I handled it so much differently. You handled it with, I would say, again, it came with some negative drawbacks, obviously, but you handled it with, I would say, maybe more confidence and maybe more aggression, in a way where you kind of went at it, where I just shut down. I was like, in my head, I'm just like, I'm not even here. Right, like I'm somewhere else because this isn't my pace.
I remember you and I having this conversation probably like really early on in high school, and one of the things I said to you that you may remember was, when I was in like 7th or 8th grade, my dad was a real retail manager. He managed malls, and the owners of those malls, who were all billionaires, would come in every once in a while, and we'd get to meet them, and we'd go to these real estate conventions that he would invite me to, and they'd have tons of billionaires there. And what I learned at a very young age was I got to meet a couple of these people, and some of them were pretty stupid. Like, they just weren't capable. They weren't nice people. They didn't take care of the people that cared about them. They didn't treat their families well. They didn't care about what they were doing besides making money. And their intellect was limited to this very focused aggression on opportunity, and everything else didn't matter. And when I saw that, I remember saying to you, and I had said it all my life, is like, the people that run our world, there's a lot of really, really incapable people who are doing that. And you are more capable than most of the people you look at and say, oh my God, I could never be that way. And I just, like, at a very young age had that like awakening that, like, these people who made it, these billionaires, these presidents, these whatever around us, they're no different than us, and a lot of times they're a lot worse than us, and they just had a context of privilege or an aggression or an opportunistic view that put them there. So I never really felt intimidated by that, whereas you may have felt like, hey, what can I do to that? Like I'm just a kid, and I used to very much feel like, well, I can fuck shit up.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I completely agree with what you're saying. And it took me, I would say, years and quite frankly, of getting my ass kicked in life to recognize that, right? Because eventually you get beat down again and again and again. And then, okay, you're at bottom, but rock bottom is a great place to build a foundation sometimes, right? So then you start realizing that, and then you start evaluating the people around you, right? We don't have to let's not get political, but we can look at things that are going around in our country, in our world, people who are in charge where you're like, why are you in charge? And the reason I kind of bring this up is there's a lot of people, and I'm dealing a lot with social media now, and I'm sure you are too. It's a lot of know-it-alls and all this stuff on the internet who live kind of in this black and white world, who are not really that interested in nuance. And I find that, there's a lot of media voices that are kind of taking over this idea, and they kind of standardize a way of thinking, and it's not real. And somebody like you who kind of challenges that narrative, I find myself, I cannot help myself at this point. I literally like what you're talking about. The first thing I ask almost every time is why. I literally, there's that generic statement, start with why, but I find it to be very true, right? Because if you really ask that question, you can start digging into everything, and then you start requesting answers, and then you find out, well, there might not be some answers here. And then all of a sudden you start finding the vulnerability, and that's where you can build your confidence to kind of be like, oh, there is an opportunity here. So let me ask you, you're a young guy, you got kicked out of school, right? And your thought is, I'm going to college, right? You got your GED, you were a D1 athlete at Drexel. From what I remember, I think it was about 1 year in, you were like, I'm out, right?
Yeah. So yeah, basically so it was last day of junior year that I got kicked out. I was actually allowed to withdraw. It wasn't basically, they didn't want to make
You're a
a
good
bigger
student,
deal
if I
about
remember.
it. Not a good student.
You're
I
like
got really
better
good
than me.
grades, and I got put in
Right.
honors in AP, but I did not have a good GPA because I didn't do any of the work. And I got in trouble a lot. I had a stack of Saturdays when I got dismissed that were like, you owe us community service or something. So I wasn't the best student. But when they kicked me out senior year, we looked into like, do I enroll at a local school nearby? Do I go to a private school? And then my dad was like, why go back to school? He goes like, at the time, and I guess this is relevant context, I've been running a web design company that I've been running since I was 13, and I was making good money. I was making more money than I would have paid for school, but it would have all gone to, school. And so he kind of came to me and said, I'll give you like X amount of money to just move to California and start your business now. And I was 17. He was like, we'll emancipate you, do whatever you want, just go, because I know you're going to be miserable at school. But the problem was I'd spent, and you'll remember, Friday nights, I didn't go out drinking because I had soccer practice. Like, I didn't drink Friday, Saturday night. All my friends all through high school, all they did was party. I never got that experience. I never was a partier. All I did was stay in and, play soccer. And, I had, my other recreational activities to enjoy myself. But like, it was soccer. And I sacrificed my whole social life of high school for soccer. So I was like, there's no way I'm not playing in college. Like, I worked all this to do that. And my dad's like, you're going to waste your time. And, I had offers when I got kicked out of high school that all disappeared. So what ended up happening was I ended up enrolling at Monco Community College so that I could start to get college credits. And when I did that, I found out I was eligible for my GED. I had enough credits in high school to get my GED and enough to enroll in Monco. So I did my GED test. I was at Monco. And while I was there, just coincidentally, one of the coaches at Drexel was like, hey, we'll still, we'll take you. Like, we don't mind. And I was like, yo, Dad, like, I really want to do this. That happened. Temple heard at the same time. And so it was between Drexel and Temple. Temple was obviously a lot more affordable affordable than Drexel. The scholarship that they were giving was very limited. And so my dad was like, why are you paying to go to school? And I was like, I just have to, like, I have to know that I'm a D1 athlete. Like, I have to know it because I've worked my whole life for it. And so I did. I went to Drexel, and as soon as I got there, like, I loved it. It was a great experience. It was so fun. And Drexel doesn't have a football team, so soccer gets a ton of attention. And, you know, it was just a really awesome experience. But you came year two, I asked the coach for a bigger scholarship. He said, you know, he wanted to see more. And I was just like, see ya, I'm making too much money. And I dropped out. When I dropped out, you know, right then, I had a bunch of debt for a year of, you know, half whatever I had to pay in tuition in a year, and I had nothing, you know, coming out of it. And so my partner, Chris Alfano, who was actually still enrolled at Drexel and shortly thereafter dropped out, had access to the buildings at Drexel because he was still a student. So for a year, we lived like in Bucks County, taking the train down to Drexel, and using the office to build our software company, which eventually, you know, grew into Jarvis. And, you know, we bootstrapped that with zero investment and just, you know, struggled through it, and turned it into, you know, one of Philadelphia's largest software agencies. So it was a rough road for a while, but I think, you know, the privilege I had is I always knew what I wanted to do. You know, you remember it when we were 17, all of our friends were just like, what do we do with our lives? What am I doing? Nobody knew what they wanted to do. And I knew since I was 9 years old, I knew what I wanted to do. And that was a privilege that I didn't take for granted, and kind of helped guide me through what was otherwise chaos.
Well, I think quite frankly, it's probably because you figured out what you don't want to do. It allowed you to narrow down your scope, where I don't think I had the confidence at that age to even eliminate stuff from it, right? Like, I remember us talking about college, right? Like, the idea of not going to college, I didn't even understand that concept today. Like, today I understand the concept. It's not that I would recommend college against most people, but I would ask people, again, why are you going to college? I find it very interesting how, you know, we go through this whole cycle, right? And the reason I think that you're kind of perfect for this podcast is because if you listen to like the story, and again, we're only in the beginning part, your young part of your story, there are a list of failures, of up and downs, of chaos, of stuff that, quite frankly, the average kid would not want to deal with. The average adult would not want to deal with. And it would make people panic, right? A lot of people panic, maybe even spiral, which we see. And again, you had great parents. So I would say a lot of their support probably left you not spiraling in any way and probably excelling, using that energy really as fuel, like rocket fuel. And I would say you definitely used it as rocket fuel. I wanted to show that. I wanted to show that you can take this path of most resistance, chaos, and yet still come out on top in the end. And the reason I bring that up is because, you know, I cover the Flyers, right? And we cover a lot of prospects, and prospects are kids. A lot of times they're 18, 19, 20. How many of them are actually developed in who they are mentally, maturely? Odds are they're not. Maybe a little bit more than most kids to get there, but they're probably not. And I think it's really important for people to hear that, because you are successful, right? And if I asked people 15, 20 years ago, and I guarantee that there are people our age that doubted you. I did not. I always knew you were going to be successful. To what degree, I don't know, right? But at the end of the day, that never was that's not your story, right? That's only one chunk of the story. And I really want people to notice that, because a lot of times prospects will struggle and people will give up on them. And I think you're a perfect example of why never give up on young talent.
I would say, to give like an analogy or a perspective context here, think about the person who, you know, like you said, like the idea of not going to school was never, like, not even a thought. And
Right.
So if I came to you and I told you that, like, I have, you know, I'm skipping school, I'm doing this, that would sound like anxiety inducing risk. It would be like, oh my God, I can't do that. That sounds scary. That sounds like work. That sounds awful. My parents are going to hate me. You know, all that anxiety balls up, right? Well, my equation was just flipped. It was that simple. When you talked about going to college and getting a job, that's how I felt. Anxiety, like that panic. Oh my God, I can't do that. I can't sit in an office every day. Like, it was utter panic. And so people used to ask me about risk tolerance and be like, how did you have the risk to drop out of school? I was like, staying in school is a much bigger risk. And I felt like that's how I viscerally felt, like anxiety that, like, I might go to college, go do a job, and just have this linear progression in life. That was the most terrifying thing in the world to me. So that, in the same way that somebody telling you they wanted to drop out of school, you could just ignore them. I could just ignore everybody saying they wanted to go to school because that sounded terrifying. And so school never was a pathway to me. It was really just a proof point that I could do it. Like I honestly went to Drexel so that I could say I was a D1 athlete. Like that's the truth. If you took soccer away, I never would have gone to college. That's really the only reason. And I like the idea of empowering kids who are outside that realm and go like, how many kids get in trouble? Like I got in legal trouble, I got in trouble. I got kicked out of school. It was a computer hacking thing where, it wasn't like I was hacking for my benefit. I was storing MP3s on our school, computers back in the day when, hard drives cost a lot and storage was expensive. And somebody else got caught stealing a final and ratted me out for storing these so it was like, I was just learning and tinkering and playing, but I got in trouble and would have ruined a lot of people's forward pathways when all of a sudden schools won't talk to you, because you've got a criminal record and all of these things. And, for me, telling that proof point that like you can still be a really successful person, forget those frameworks that parents and adults and whatever tell you as a kid that you have to follow. That's just not necessary. But I think the problem is that so many people in my position just talk about like the success that they've learned now. There's always like this temporal context in podcasts when you talk about like, what did you do to make you successful? In the past month, I've probably learned things that I'll say now to you that like, hey, this is why I'm better. But I didn't know that 14 years ago. I didn't know that 16 years ago. And everybody talks in this hindsight, right? And that's the biggest issue, I think, is that we don't stop and go, what was it like back then? And for me, back then, it wasn't about, anything besides being different, and it was ego, right? What I did, at least I got lucky in, is that my ego was aligned in a really productive, my ego was about being productive. It was about having an impact on humanity. If my ego had been about vanity or progression and somewhere else, maybe I wouldn't have done any of this and I would have got stuck. So it's not because I have these skill sets, it's not because I had these things that I succeeded. Back then it was just the right alignment of ego, and I think that's what's really important for kids, is to understand where that ego is sending you and why, which is not something I understood at the time. It took me a long time, but I think if you're a kid listening to this, you want to think like, what is it? Am I proud? Like, do I like being the best hockey player around? And I love that I'm getting recruited, and I love that people know that, and I want to go to the NHL so everybody knows that I'm the one who made the NHL. Or are you sitting there going, all I want to do is raise a family, and all I can think about is making money to have a kid and be able to play on the swing set? Because there's plenty of people who feel that way too. Know where your ego is sending you, and the more conscious you can be aware of it, the better you'll be. But I wasn't very great at it until much later in life.
So let me ask you this: when your ego takes a shot, especially when you're younger, how did you handle it? You know what I mean? Like, for instance, you're definitely smart enough to finish high school. I mean, you're smart enough to finish college without a doubt. You have to deal with a lot of outside judgment. It's all bullshit nowadays, right? But quite frankly, like, how did you deal with it at the time? Like I think about it now, and I knew you at the time, right? But what was going through your head kind of like as you're going against the grain consistently all the time? And there's no way you didn't hear a bunch of people opening their mouths saying, don't do this, don't do that. I hear it today. The things that I've done to succeed, how many people told me to ignore the Flyers?
Right.
How many people told me I was wasting my time? And now I'm in the locker room. I know people within the organization. Everybody told me I was wasting my time. So how did you deal with that when you were younger?
That never had an impact. That never ever got my way. I never, like I said before, like, because of that risk thing. Like what you were saying was so risky to me that it, like, that didn't bother me. So I would have Friday nights where everybody was going out, and I'd be like, I have a client project, and I remember my friends would be like, oh, Fazio's a client, like, what's he doing? And like they'd make fun of me. And I remember when I had my first real success, and I like bought a house for myself. I heard friends go, oh, you must be a drug dealer or something. Like taking these shots, and I'm like, I've just spent 10 years building a company that was not an overnight success. I lived on spaghetti and late eviction notices for years to get here, but that's how you summarize. But that never That never bothered me. That was not like, to me, that was just noise. I never, like, I knew what I wanted to do. Again, that was the privilege I had. So everybody talking the negative, it didn't even fuel me because I just ignored it. It just meant nothing to me. So dropping out of school, nothing like that felt like a failure. What hurt me was not making the regional team when Josh did, wanting, to date somebody who wanted to date my best friend, wanting, to be able to travel to Portugal for a tournament that wasn't sponsored, but my family didn't afford it, and only the kids from Harridan went. Like whatever it was those things where I'd be like, like it was like the miss, like I didn't feel like I was good enough. And I didn't probably handle that very well at the time. I was probably immature about it, like most of us are at that age. But the one thing I did was I funneled that into working out, playing
Fuel.
Yeah, I remember, Josh, is a great example. He worked harder than anybody I knew. His dad would have him out back taking left-footed shots, right-footed shots all morning, every morning before he came in. And I remember when he made that, regional team, or I forget which team it was specifically, but I didn't make it, and he was a year older than me. I was a year younger, and it was kind of like my team should have been easier to make, and I still didn't make it, but he did. And I was just like, well, he works harder than me, so I'll fix that. From then on, I was outside more than he was. If we were outside playing together and he was tired, I stayed longer just to say I played longer than him. And that's when I got good. Like before that, I was probably a D3 player. That's when I became a D1 player, was because I said, I can't feel this again. I have to know that I exhausted myself, because if Josh is working harder than me right now, then I'm not working that hard. And so I have to be working as hard as possible. So again, when it comes to, the failure, whatever it is that you feel failure, wherever you feel like, I'm short here, I'm not doing enough, the worst feeling is when you're like, I wasn't born with something, like I want to be taller, right? Like, or like something like that, where there's like nothing you can do about it. Yeah, whenever you have that, just fuel yourself in the other direction. And I think the biggest thing to remember is the people that succeed, that, Josh had his own insecurities, that person you want to be as tall as has a problem with something else that you probably don't have. There's always that shortcoming. And in this world of like celebrity, we just want to pretend like everything is roses at the top, instead of saying like, those celebrities might even have more problems than you. They might even be less content than you are. And I don't think we, focus on that. So use it as fuel, but that's like buzzwords, right? What does that actually mean? Use it as fuel. All I can really say is do your best when you feel sad, when you feel angry, when you feel anxiety, to whatever it is that you're good at, do that right then in that moment. That's all I can recommend.
It's using that uncomfortability, right? It's like what happened between you and Josh made you very uncomfortable, right? You're highly competitive and you still love the guy, right? It's not like you wanted to like fight Josh.
No, I never held it against him.
Exactly. You're like, what do I do within my control? And the reason I bring that up is because, back then it was your friends talking shit. Today it's Twitter, right? Today an athlete goes out, he does stuff, and they all have Twitter. Like I see it, you know what I mean? It's every time they have a bad game, they're a bad player. Every time they have a bad season, their career is over. And I really want to focus on that with you, because I think you are somebody who mentally, while maybe some of it you put on yourself, I think you built a strength in your brain that the average person doesn't have unless they build it up. Like it took, like you were saying, I've had series of fail. I've been fired probably more than most people in their entire life in the beginning of my career. And those were key for me to understand what my shortcomings were. Again, I was the key element in all of these things. And since then, I've completely changed my career, right? And all of that stuff took the failures, right? And I wanted to bring that up because if people know you today and they didn't know your history, I don't think most people would guess these things about you. Like, do you find that?
Yeah, no, I think that's true to an extent. One of the things for me that was most important was just kind of understanding that life's not fair, and like no matter what you do, it doesn't, it's all about just you and your perseverance. So like you talk about the, you know, the mental skill that, you know, I developed, which I, you know, call resilience or grit, you know. I think it comes a lot, you know, again, from my dad. And I think culturally, when you talk about these things like we tear down players, didn't used to happen. I do think this is a newer thing. And I think that, you know, and I might, you know, pay for this later, but it's the trophy generation bullshit. You know, it's this idea that everybody gets a trophy, you know, the participation trophy, and this idea that nobody loses and nobody fails. And you don't learn to deal with failure when that shit happens. And, you know, my daughter's not getting participation trophies. She either wins or she loses. And if she loses, we'll deal with her being sad, because that's what life is, right? And this idea, it just pisses me off. And I think it's created an entire culture of people who are entitled. And, you know, it's bottom line, they're entitled and unaware of their own privilege. And because of it, they demand things that they don't earn. You know, and for me, one of the best experiences was 7th grade wrestling. I was a very good wrestler. I had actually won districts for Lower Moreland, and I was going to state championships. And one of my old friends, this guy Dominic, that I was in kindergarten with, who was wrestling against me at another school, we were both in quarters at different sides, and he won. Both in semis. He's about to go. He's in the finals. All I want to do is play Dominic, because like he was just like the best in the state. I knew it. He was my friend. I wanted to beat him. And in the semis, I'm wrestling and I'm killing this kid. Just like threw him down 3 times, pushed him out twice. It was just like no competition. And we end. And if you're not familiar with wrestling, you know, the ref raises your hand for if you've won. And he raised the kid's hand. And I'm like, no. No, something's wrong. And my father had videotaped the competition. And so I run over to him. We look at the camera, and basically the scorekeeper, you wear a red and a green band, and the ref, every time there's a point, he throws up the arm for the point. The scorekeeper did it in reverse, had taken every point I scored and gave it to the kid. And then at the end, he read him the wrong thing. The funny part is in the video, the scorekeeper realized, you can see him go like, oh, whoops, the ref just told. So you know, I'm like, Dad, I won. I got to play Dominic. Like, I got to do this. So he goes up to this, you know, we're in this like big gymnasium, and he goes up to the organizer and he goes like, hey, we have video. This was wrong. My son won. He's in the state championships. This is a big deal for him. And they were like, well, we're already starting the match. You know, there's no way we can cancel it. And my dad turns and looks at me and he goes, I could probably fight this and we could probably fix this, but this is as good a time as any for you to learn that life's not fair. So you lost. And we left, and I was angry, like so angry, you know, like, what do you mean? I didn't lose. You can't even tell me I lost. I won. We have proof. I won. But you want to hold me back from this for a lesson. And at the time I hated it. I was mad at him for it. But looking back on it, it was like a callus that builds a muscle, you know, or makes you a little tougher. And every time after that, something unfair happened. I was like, well, at least it's not as unfair as 7th grade wrestling.
I love that. That's a great story, actually. I was kind of wondering where you were going with that. I think that was perfect. Because one of those things where your life is definitely not going to be fair. There are definitely things going to happen to you that shouldn't have happened to you, but do. And I actually find that the true winners in life are the ones who build character through that. And I think it's quite clear across the board. And if you look at athletics in general, I mean, I say this all the time about, so everybody wants their season to be perfect, right? So the Flyers struggle or whatever, and we can forget this season. But if you look at all the Stanley Cup champions, they all struggled either in the beginning of their season or at some point where they collapsed. Those who do not understand failure will not succeed.
Exactly. That's the exact thing I was just about to say, is that you have 2 types of champion, or you have 2 types of like the celebrity growth athlete. You either have that kid who never lost, and then they get to the pros and they get a real wake up call. You know, the Andrew Luck stories, you know, you get a lot of those. But then on the flip side, you've got the Tom Brady, Michael Jordans, who had nothing but failure until they were grown ass men, and then learned what success was because they earned it, right? And Jordan, how many times did he fail? How many times did he get cut? You know, Tom Brady, look at his draft pick picture, you know, tells the whole story, right?
People still say he stinks, which is incredible to me.
That's a different story. But anyway, the point was that, you know, he didn't. There is no perfect. And so, you know, to me, like, I always felt like I learned the most from failure. I hated losing state championships, but I learned how to be a better player when we lost. When we win, I didn't learn shit. I just thought, okay, what I'm doing is good. do more. But when I failed, I sat there thinking about all the things I could do wrong. And software, for anybody who's like not familiar with the industry, we talk a lot about failure because it's accepted. You can't build software without failing a lot to get there. It's not like building a house where like I put this wall up and it stays. It's like I put this wall up, but then all the floors changed and now the wall doesn't stand up anymore. So I have to fit, that's software. Like, and so, I really carried that over and honed in on that like muscle that, failure is essential, and using it to learn is the only way that you're going to grow. And so I think that if you look at all the success stories in business and sports and, whatever career, even, art, you're going to find that the people who are most successful are the people who struggled and accepted learning from failure. So not necessarily adversity. I wouldn't say I had a very adverse life, but I had a lot of failures within that privilege that taught me dealing with that and allowed me to empathize with somebody who had real adversity. And I can't say like I relate to what it's like to have grown up without knowing where your dinner comes from. So I can't relate to that kid who, has that feeling. But hey, I've had my own share of shortcomings, so at least I can be empathetic to how much worse your situation is than mine.
Oh, I love that answer. This is actually a perfect segue. You have run, I would say maybe 3 companies, unless I miscounted that at this point. Did 3 or more?
A lot more than that. Yeah.
3? Okay. Oh, I know Jarvis, DevNuts, and Nerd Street Games, and obviously you had like the smaller stuff when you were younger. But the reason I ask is you have to build teams. You said you're managing 120, 130 employees right now. What's that like? Do you find that your personality, what you've gone through today, do you find that helps you build the team, and not just the team, the value system behind the teams that you manage and that you use to propel your businesses together?
Yeah, so I like, I'm not a very good manager. I never have been, staying on top of somebody, tracking expectations. It's just not something I'm good at, but I'm a very good leader. Meaning I can give you a vision, I can give you a pathway, I can inspire you, I can pick you up when you fall, and I can help, support you. My favorite thing in the world is mentoring. Seeing a 17-year-old with potential turn into a 24-year-old leader in his industry or her industry is the most rewarding thing for me. So like, I love coaching, I love inspiring. When it comes to managing, I suck. So I have to go hire the people that do it. And I think, when it comes to growing a team, you have to know your weaknesses. That's the most important part. Is like, the first thing I did was hire a really strong manager that could handle that. And, I'm a very, creative person in terms of function, but not form. I'm not good at aesthetic. I'm not, you remember how I dressed in high school. That's not my thing. I'm colorblind. Like I'm not good at aesthetics. So I have to hire that and bring in somebody who's there. Now I'm coaching somebody, I'm leading somebody who has more experience, more potential, and they're better at what they're doing than me, but I still have to tell them what to do, right? And so being able to, we talk a lot about like autonomy and not micromanaging, but it's way beyond that. It's being able to empathize and respect, right? And I learned that from being a captain on a soccer team, because I was often the captain. Like, some teams pick the best player to be the captain always. Every team I was on, I was captain, but I was never the best player because I had, that drive to make everybody else better. And so I learned, soccer, hockey, basketball taught me a lot about how to kind of drive, inspire, lead without necessarily the management skill that's necessary. So all types of leaders, are different there, but that's always been the hard part for me is managing, as you scale. And so I have to make sure I'm hiring and trusting the people that can do it. One of the hardest things is recruiting, because there's a twofold issue here. Number one is that you end up recruiting from your own pipeline, right? And when you do that, you're only looking at people you're familiar with, but like I need people who have built Uber, and Airbnb, like those, I don't know those people, but I need them. So I can't only be hiring from, where I'm looking at. And 2 is understanding the mismatch right now in the output of capable people and marketplace. And so like diversity is really important to me, right? We're building a business that empowers people to connect and creates access, from everywhere from, middle class suburbs to low income, urban areas. And if I'm going to have, a dominant portion of my player base be black, I better have black leaders, that understand that so that they can, manage a product there. If I'm entering a Hispanic community and I have no Hispanic people on my team, I'm lacking a lot of perspective in creating that. So diversity has been so important to me about like hiring people that can represent the community we're actually servicing. However, what's really difficult about that is A, we're in an industry that didn't exist 10 years ago, so nobody's being trained for it. But B, the current pipelines are not aligned with the needs. And so I'm spending a lot of time right now figuring out like where are the schools that are empowering the Hispanic people and people of color with the tools and capabilities that we're hiring for. And hey, it's there. I just had a disconnect because I grew up in one sect and that's a different sect. And so now I have to spend a lot of energy learning those other groups, learning where these different, pipelines of opportunity are created. But what's most exciting for me is the fact that we're actually creating them too, right? So there's going to be kids who come in and play games and then fall in love with the computer and find their career on the computer. There's going to be kids who, come in and play games and learn camaraderie, coaching, leadership, all the things I learned from soccer. They're going to learn those from video games and go off and build their own careers from that. So, it's exciting, to have that much impact, but also it's constantly a desire to be better than we are and to break outside that mold that's behind me, and it's hard, and that's definitely an area I've failed at. I think we've built a somewhat diverse team, but not where I want to be, and so in terms of weakness, that's one of them, and then I don't have answers. I'm trying very hard to expand pipelines and recruiting, but it's hard.
It's really interesting because as you're talking, I'm like thinking like, you're talking about expanding pipelines and hiring from within. It's just funny how it aligns so much with athletics,
Yep.
because you have a drafting pipeline. And this is what I talk about all the time, like getting drafted in the NHL or any sport. It's like graduating high school a lot of times. You're not guaranteed a successful career. Maybe if you're lucky, you get an entry-level contract, but not all those kids do. And it's interesting that, you have to look in various places, check different countries, look for different type of playing styles, right? It's kind of what you're talking about here. So do you find that the effort that you put forth at this point has kind of changed the culture of your company? Or do you feel that you still kind of drive the culture of your companies?
Both for sure. But one of the things I tell the company all the time is, part of building a company from scratch is we get to do it our way. And, like I talk about the contrarian piece of me, it was like, how can we do this all differently and rethinking corporate structure and stuff like that. But, it's also rethinking corporate empathy, right? And so like, we're doing it. We don't have to do it the way anybody else has done it. Somebody comes to me and says, we want to dedicate a bunch of our, income here to, a cause that we feel really strongly about because we can help people. Let's do it. We find that there's a way for us to spend money that might not have immediate upside profit, but it's going to benefit a community's development and it'll pay off for us over the years. Let's do it. We get to make these decisions on our own. And so I'm always pushing our team, which is a mostly younger team, a younger newer generations, to like, let's redefine what a successful company culture looks like. And so I think in some ways I drive that seed, but the team has just been incredible at like giving us feedback and coming back to us. And I've had employees call me out, and that's like my favorite thing in the world is when an employee will step up and tell me that they think I'm wrong. And we've had employees step up and say, like, listen, we were really happy what you were doing with Black Lives Matters, but it felt reactionary and it didn't continue in a way that we thought was meaningful enough. And I'll turn around, maybe feel defensive and say, look, we were doing this stuff way before Black Lives Matters, but you're right. So how can I do better? And this employee now has impact on us. And I don't think many leaders think like that. I don't think many companies think like that. I don't think many companies stop and take that feedback. And I want to be a company that does. And that's been a a really important piece of what we're trying to accomplish here. On the build side, when you talk about pipelines, like you're mentioning the NHL, I say this all the time. Like I look at the Super Bowl, right, and you got 50 dudes on the field, and making millions and millions of dollars. But what that represents to me is hundreds of millions of kids, boys and girls, who grew up aspiring to play football, playing in a football system, playing in some sort of program, and most of them learned and got skills and may have got careers and educations out of it. Just because they're not one of the 100 on a football field during the Super Bowl doesn't mean that Super Bowl wasn't the reason that they're all paying attention and driving that. And there is no greater equalizer than sports. We've known that for a long time. A lot of us say education's there as a pipeline. Besides education, sports is the only opportunity creator for most people on the planet, let alone the United States. But if we esports, which is an expensive concept, it's playing on a $3,000 computer, $200 keyboard, $100 mouse, $120 headset, is inaccessible to most people. Most people playing video games are playing on last generation's console, last year's Madden, 2 years ago's NHL, you name it. But they're still gamers. They still play all the time. They're just not on the modern equipment. And so if we don't find affordable pathways, which is what our business focuses on, is building these actual facilities that make the access to that equipment more affordable, then the industry will never grow and it'll always be just privileged. Not to take a shot at hockey, but that's hockey's biggest problem, right? Hockey's hockey's a like almost homogenous demographic, and there's very little diversity because it's a very expensive sport with a very high barrier of entry. It's not something that if you're a youth in Mantua, West Philadelphia, you're going to have access to an ice hockey rink, pads, skates, the league fees. That's out of the question. But there is a park at the end of the corner that has a basketball net and a basketball. Now, if you're in Russia, you are the poor kid because you've got an ice pond out back and all I need are some metal blades to skate on and a wood stick to hit, so it becomes accessible because of the ice. So over in Russia, you do have the poor kids playing, right? But in America, there ain't no poor kids playing hockey, period. That doesn't happen, right? And so we as Americans decided that ice hockey didn't have enough demand to subsidize that cost for cities, and that's fine. It's still an awesome sport. It's still a high quality sport, but it's never going to be a sport that can claim the impact that football or basketball have on people who need opportunity in America. Like again, in Russia, different story. You've got ice ponds in your backyard. Unless you're in Canada, or Michigan here, that's likely not the case for you. And so we don't want esports to turn out looking like ice hockey, where it's limited to these people, because unlike ice hockey, everybody can play video games. Not everybody's going to be able to skate around, but everybody can play video games. And so we can simply reach more people. And I don't think sports goes anywhere. I'm a huge sports fan. I love sports. Yeah. Every sport you can name, I'll absorb and watch. But
played hockey as well. Yep.
Yeah, I grew up playing hockey. I grew up playing basketball. Grew up playing baseball, soccer. So I just love sports. But esports will be bigger. Esports will be the center of the culture because it's more accessible.
I love that, and I do agree that is the NHL's problem. It's a huge barrier to entry that they have, and like rest in peace, Ed Snyder. He did try to, he made the Ed Snyder Youth Foundation, so he did try to do that here. I do believe there's some success there, and the Flyers
Snyder's kids and Snyder's Foundation's awesome. We
worked
with them. Right? I love them.
Exactly.
I love what they're doing, but isn't it a shame that a foundation has to do it?
Exactly. And then the Flyers actually drafted somebody, Zayd Wisdom, recently, and he actually had financial problems, right? I think he lost his father at some point in his life, but he's raised by a single mother, and he won an award because, again, this kid has all character. Nobody thought he would even be an athlete, at least to this level, and he was playing on the Phantoms right now and killing it, and he's way ahead of schedule, and it's a kid who suffered a lot. And again, I kind of think of that, and he's already NHL ready, it seems like, at way ahead of time. Is a kid who faced adversity, like kind of we were saying, and you might not find a kid like that because of what you're talking about. And I agree, hockey does have that problem. It would be really nice if they switched it. Because I think you're onto something there.
It's really expensive, and that's where we're at a position where we have the attention and the consumer spend from, video games that we can race out and build them all.
Right.
The analogy is we're building ice hockeys in every city across the country and then connecting them to a unified platform where the margins are higher so that I can afford to subsidize the cost of the rinks. nobody's going to do that in ice hockey right now unless suddenly every kid in every city wanted to play hockey like they do for video games.
Oh, I love that idea. So let's talk about video games. This is where I wanted to kind of finalize this conversation anyway. So I would say in Philadelphia, there isn't a humongous video game scene. Like, you can point to some other places around the country, but this is still a very large city with a ton of gamers, like you're saying. And you started Nerd Street Gaming, right? Which is, from what I understand, there was an esports team as well, and also now locations all around. What do you think about what you've done here in Philly, and where do you see esports growing? Not just in Philly, but globally. I mean, you kind of mentioned it, but maybe dig a little bit deeper.
Yeah, so in Philadelphia, when we created this thing, nobody was talking about esports. And flash forward a year, there's professional esports franchises, buildings, multiple buildings, multiple people programming. There's esports summer camps that we're doing and other people are doing. So, it really took off. But what I'm most proud of is all the school district teams that exist now because they're able to use the facility, right? And so, that type of empowerment and turning on is so important because the equipment is the same equipment you need for STEM learning or STEAM learning, I should say now. And so, we're in a place where these computers, we had kids, I think it was almost 50% of the school district didn't have internet at home to connect for remote learning in a COVID environment, let alone play video games, right? And so, when we are able to use video games to connect them to the technology they need for their homework and from learning, we have this huge, ancillary upside. So that's really exciting, and the exciting, and the growth we've had in Philadelphia, has been very exciting. Now we're, footprint across the country. We're in, 6 different cities, and we'll be in 20 by the end of the year. And what's driving that is, a really, really simple market equation. Like, forget global is a massive market, but just in the United States, we have 99,000 high schools. Of those 99,000 high schools, there's approximately 12,000 that have signed up for some form of club esports or esports. There's only 10 to 15 kids per school that are able to participate in those groups because they have the good enough computer. Plenty more kids are on the old console, an older computer. They're gaming. They want to be there, but they don't have the relevant technology. And so every one of those 99,000 high schools is going to want an esports program, just like they want a basketball program now. When we come through and build out these venues, now an entire school district can use it, just like, in some places, school districts, I think up by us in Bucks and North County or Bucks County, you would have like a few different schools use the same ice hockey rink for their that's how it looks for esports now, where 20 high schools can leverage the same esports facility to have an esports team. So I think we're in a place where over the next 5 years, that growth that's going to come inherent from that simple equation of high schools turning on. And what happens now is in 2 years, you've got 12,000 schools that will have graduated where, forget if they played on it, for all 4 years, every kid in the school knows that there was an esports team for their school. Now it's cultural. It's built in. They're not going to go make fun of video games on ESPN because they had it in their high school. It was there, the football team and the esports team. And so that cultural phenomenon shift that's happening is going to drive this market beyond what even the most bullish investors think of what this space is. Where I think we're headed, like Ready Player One, the biggest competition, the largest pathway for opportunity in society will be esports and competitive video games. And the path to get there is either going to look like one where it's only for privileged kids and the rest of the kids are left wanting and participating late or not getting the opportunities, or one where we succeed and we build this infrastructure and it's available for everybody.
I love that. I love that vision. And I honestly, when you say it out loud, it seems 100% like probable and most likely the path that we're going. And it's funny because, obviously I'm a hardcore gamer just like yourself. I would say you're probably more of a competitive gamer where I like more like the single player stuff. And, I know you do everything, but I really love story basing and all that stuff and just problem solving puzzle games and stuff. And it has completely shaped the way that I think today, the way I solve problems. I actually even realized that the way I built Legos at 3 years old is the way I solve problems today. Is I will work through something the way it's supposed to go, and then I'll deconstruct it and find new ways to use those Lego pieces in new and interesting ways and break the mold. So it's like these games that we play growing up, they have a way of actually enhancing our brains and kind of what you're talking about. I mean, you're talking about potentially evolving people at a fast rate through technology as well. Would you say so?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the other reality here is, and I know a lot of people don't like to admit this, but never in history has there been a job for every human on the planet. And now moving forward, that's even less so, so career opportunities are going to be limited. We are going to have a future where there is not enough jobs for everybody. And so we're going to need to find other means of productive life paths forwards. Competitive video games, the community aspect, the social aspect, the fact that you're learning, the fact that there is an ecosystem of people who are getting paid to win, but there's also this whole support ecosystem. That's going to be a huge social opportunity and career driver, but more important than the careers, because we are going towards a planet where people will live their entire life without careers and be supported by other means. These type of pathways that create opportunity, create people who care about each other, can communicate, socialize, are going to be absolutely essential. And so that's what what drives me, because I believe we're 10 years away from the most meaningful business in the world being a video game business.
That's so cool. I love that idea. And if you think about kind of what happened under COVID, I've actually brought this up to Cigna, my company that I work for, and I brought it up to Comcast as well when I work for them, is, they always talk about kind of working virtual, and now we're all under COVID, right? So everybody works virtual. I've already been doing that. But if you think about the way gamers work, you talk about those headsets, you're wearing a gaming headset right now. Who knows how to collaborate virtually better than an esports team?
Yeah, we used to talk to parents about this, and they'd say, my kid's downstairs playing Fortnite all day. And I'll say, listen, your kid on Fortnite, I'm sure there's a lot of garbage that they listen to, but they also got to meet 400 people today. How many people did you meet today? How many people did you talk to? They talked to, 75 different people, and sure, 50 of them were screaming obscenities in their ear. But hey, that's like getting on the New York subway. And now I'm learning how to deal with this type of thing. Now that's where parenting comes in. If the kid just starts yelling the obscenities too, now you've got the, shit behavior snowballing. But if a parent can sit down with the kid and say, listen, you're going to hear some things. Just like any parent who's ever taken their kid in an NYC subway says, you're going to see some things, and you tell them how to handle it, how to process it, a framework for, dealing with it. That's a huge skill set that you're training just by playing the video game. Now for us, playing from home and remote means that my better internet connection gives me an advantage over you. My soccer cleats didn't make me a better player than you, but my better internet connection can actually make me better at games than you. So we have to be in person. We have to be on the same equipment for it to scale with integrity. That also has the benefit of no anonymous bullshit. We have tons of trash talk, but we don't see bigotry when you're face to face, eye to eye. We don't see this stuff that you see in the anonymous online game culture. So I think a big piece, is going to be when we scale this culture, it'll be a much more face to face culture than it is right now, especially amplified by COVID in the remote world.
Yeah, and it's funny how you're working through this thing, and even stuff that I've done for my company, I kind of invented a couple things for the company that seemed to align perfectly, just because my mindset was already kind of a virtual world. I saw things way ahead of where they did, kind of like what you're saying. It's like, obviously COVID is in no way a blessing or anything like that, but it turns out that COVID comes and your business can adapt, it can pivot, and you're already used to pivoting. And that's kind of why I want to bring this full circle, is that you have been a person, I find, that no matter what has been thrown your way, you've been able to pivot, right? You get kicked out of school, you figure out a different way. You go to soccer, it doesn't fit you, you figure out a different way. And I think that's really what I want people to take away from this, is that you can be thrown the largest variety of curveballs in your life, but if you handle them with as much poise as you can, right? Because it's all relative. You can turn that into something good.
Just stay standing. I don't know anybody who's succeeded who won't tell you persistence was their key. My wife and I had this conversation. This is great for this podcast, but when I was raising our last round of capital, I got 47 no's in a row. 47 firms said no to me in a row. And some of my board members were like worried. I wasn't. I was like, I'm going to pitch 100 before I even think about it. But some of our board members were worried, and I got put on a little bit of a shock clock. Like, listen, if that's the concern, maybe we should be changing, our direction. And then I went out and got Founders Fund. But that persistence was the reason I got somebody like Founders Fund, the first investor in Facebook, to invest in us, was because I didn't give up. And what my wife and I were talking about is we were in the middle of this, like, it was weeks prolonged. We were past, runway. We were in a place where things were really tight. But the company was doing so well, and 99% of the people that I have met in business would have just quit. They would have just folded. They would have blamed COVID. Now's as good a time as ever. Let's shut the business down. They would have, caved and sold the business. We had opportunities to sell, a controlling right to other people. We would have lost control of the business. Most people would have done that, and another, like when we were running Jarvis, Chris and I, we were 3 months behind on our rent because we hadn't gotten paid by a client we needed to get paid by. We were literally living on this spaghetti we were getting at the local store, at the Asian store in the corner, sold these like 20-pound packs of spaghetti, and that's all we were living off of. Most people, by the second month of eviction notices on the door, would have just quit, would have just stopped, would have called their parents, would have gone home. But we just didn't. We called the landlord, told them our story, begged for forgiveness, and we're able to pay them off. And I've got 100 more stories like that where most people would have quit, and we just kept going. And so, grit, persistence, be the last one standing is usually more important than any of your skill sets.
I love that. And I would say, and one thing I think I didn't mention enough of is you were one of the first people to open me up into physical fitness. Like I even remember like rollerblading with you and you running next to me, right? And I remember at the time, like, how is he able to keep up with me? Now I'm running, I'm running 6 miles.
You're running more than me now. I watch.
Yeah, dude. I'm because again, I can't stop. I can't stop. The idea of overcoming a run, it's the same thing in life. I find it to be the metaphor of life. It's like you change your perspective, you change that narrative in your head of what you're going through. Yep. Don't let that moment become your narrative. You take over that narrative. That's why I love, right? And again, this is why I think this was perfect, because this is really why I wanted to have you on, because I've known you for a while, and people who we know will probably watch this, right? And everybody's got their own story and version of what you are. But at the end of the day, the proof is in the pudding, right? And that's why I love it, because no matter what people have doubted you or thrown stuff at you, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. The stuff doesn't matter. It's control what you can control. I feel like you've always done a really good job of that. And I love it. I love that you're successful now. I love that you're doing the esports thing. I think this is awesome because it's validation into something I didn't understand early enough. I think you understood it earlier than me. It took me getting my butt kicked and not having, like, my dad letting me get my butt kicked, quite frankly. Yeah. And that's what I needed. I needed it a little bit, right? And it took time to kind of realize that. And then to see you kind of, I've seen you get your butt kicked along the way, but I always saw you get back up. And you always had kind of that drive and that attitude behind it. I always didn't understand how you kept rolling that. I would even argue it offended people at times. Mm-hmm. Who cares, right? The idea is to persevere. Life is kind of about survival in a lot of ways. Not everything, but I think it's great. And I think you have an athlete's mindset, and it shows in what you do.
I appreciate that. They're flattering words, and they mean a lot to me. I'll leave you with the one piece of advice I always appreciated, which was start your day by making your bed. And you talked about working out. You talked about how you have to overcome this, and now it creates and applies to all these other things, right? Working out, and anybody who consistently works out knows that you learn the most important thing, that you can do more than you think you can do. That's the thing that everybody who works out knows, is that one last press, that one last set, that one last mile that you never think you can, but you always can. And then it applies to your real life. And so the make the bed analogy for me is it forces you to take the time to take care of your future self. Tonight, I'm going to have a bed made that I get to come home to. And it's simple, doesn't take any effort, but you've started your day with doing something for yourself that's productive. And, I've taken advantage of that for a long time. And it's start small. That's the best advice I have.
I love that. And obviously I film in my room, so everybody sees my bedroom. And when I work, like, my work computer's right over here, so they always
I usually
see
have a much better backdrop. I just moved into this house, so that's why I'm,
no,
hostage
it's
video.
Very, very appropriate. But everybody always comments, they're like, "Oh, your bed's always made." And again, the same thing you're saying, that it's small. Because again, I wasn't this type of person growing up. I had to learn these things, right? I had to find value in consistency, which I was not, right?
You were great at aesthetic consistency. I'll give you that. I remember in high school being like, he's shaving before we go out. Like, I haven't shaved in 3 days. Like, he's doing his hair. Like, he cares. And like, I never cared. And I always, I never like judged you for that. I always respected you for that. Like, there was so much attention to detail there. And maybe that's, you know, the ego conversation we had. Your ego was like, I look good. I want to look good. I know I look good. And so you put the effort in there, and it's all about like, can I aim my ego at the right productive place?
Exactly. Yeah. No, absolutely. I appreciate that. And still pay attention to aesthetic quite a bit today.
I can tell your hair looks amazing.
Thanks, buddy. All right. Well, I think this is a perfect place to end. We're just a little bit over an hour, so this is perfect.
Cool.
Anything you want to shout out to Nerd Street? I mean, obviously, guys, check out Nerd Street Games in general. There is a place I know of here, obviously, in Northern Liberties. There's a local host. I don't know the situation with COVID right now, but obviously check that out eventually if you guys are into gaming at all. Absolutely look into John here and look into his company. Anything else you want to shout out?
Appreciate it. Yeah, nerdstreet.com. Check us out. We have a new building on 401 North Broad, which is Broad and Cal Hill. It's going up. It's an awesome esports campus that'll be open in the fall with a massive esports facility. We have our studio set up in Northern Liberties, as Yariv mentioned, on 3rd and Poplar. That'll be opened up again in the summer. And then our Baker Center, North Philadelphia location is open and live right now. Come check it out whenever you want. And thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, man, that's sick. I love that. I love all the locations. And again, guys, make sure to check this stuff out. I know most people who listen to this, you guys play games. If you only play NHL, that's cool. I'm sure they compete in NHL too, but definitely check out games. You know, you were all gamers. Otherwise,
bring a bunch of friends, play a bunch of chell, drink beers, have fun.
Perfect statement. I love that. It was a great end. John, thank you again, man. I really appreciate you coming on. Yeah, I think this was perfect, and it's worked out exactly like I wanted it to work out. So I appreciate you coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, for sure. For everybody listening, please like, subscribe, comment. If you comment to John, I can always get the message to him if you guys need to. But yeah, like, subscribe, do whatever you want, but any kind of support absolutely helps. And thank you so much for listening. And this has been so much fun. I can't wait to continue doing more of these episodes. So keep listening, stay gritty, and always level up.